my wife said. "Honey, I'm going on a girls' trip. Use this time to think about your mistakes." I smiled and replied, "Safe travels." What I didn't tell her was that I'd been thinking about mistakes for months already. I'd been married to Melissa for 4 years, and somewhere along the way, I'd stopped recognizing the man in the mirror. I'm a construction project manager, the kind of guy who can coordinate 20 subcontractors and keep $1 million build on schedule, but apparently I couldn't figure out how to load a dishwasher correctly or fold towels to my wife's exacting standards. Every morning started the same way. I'd wake up at 5:30, make coffee, and within minutes Melissa would appear in the kitchen like a domestic drill sergeant, already cataloging my failures. "Warren, you left another ring on the counter. Do you see this? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You just don't think about how your actions affect other people." She'd hold up the barely visible watermark like evidence in a murder trial. I'd apologize, wipe it down, and she'd continue her daily inventory of disappointments. "And look at this, you didn't put the coffee canister back in the exact same spot." Everything has a place, Warren. When things aren't where they belong, it creates chaos in my mind, and chaos in my mind affects my work. Melissa worked as a freelance interior designer, which apparently required a level of domestic perfection that I, as a mere construction professional who dealt with actual chaos daily, couldn't comprehend. According to her, my negative energy was sabotaging her creative process and causing the stress headaches that plagued her most afternoons. I had another client meeting yesterday that went terribly because I was so stressed from coming home to this disaster, she'd say, gesturing at our spotless kitchen where I'd apparently committed the crime of leaving my work boots near the back door instead of in the designated boot area of the mudroom. Mrs. Patterson could sense my tension, and now she's questioning my design choices. This is directly affecting my business, Warren. I learned early in our marriage that defending myself only led to 3-hour lectures about my defensive attitude and inability to accept constructive criticism. It was easier to nod, apologize, and try harder to meet standards that seemed to shift daily based on her mood and stress levels. The garage became another battleground. She'd scheduled a weekend organization project every month where she'd supervise me rearranging tools I used regularly into systems that looked Pinterest perfect but made my actual work impossible. "Warren, I've color-coded everything and created zones based on frequency of use and seasonal relevance. This isn't just about organization, it's about creating intentional living spaces that reflect our values." I'd spend Saturday mornings moving wrenches from logical locations to aesthetically pleasing ones, knowing I'd have to waste time every workday hunting for basic tools. But pointing this out would trigger a lecture about my resistance to positive change and how my attachment to masculine chaos was holding back our relationship's growth. When she announced her wellness retreat to Sedona with her yoga instructor friends, she presented it as medical necessity. "I need this healing time, Warren. Living with someone who fights me on every improvement, who can't see how his energy affects the sacred space we're supposed to be creating together, it's literally making me sick. My chakras are completely blocked." She'd booked a week at some expensive retreat center where she'd realign her spirit and clear the toxicity from her aura. The way she explained it, I was essentially a walking poison cloud contaminating her path to enlightenment. "Use this time to really think about your mistakes," she said while packing her crystals and essential oils. "Think about how you can be better when I return. Maybe write in a journal or meditate on your resistance to growth." I nodded and helped carry her luggage to the car, watching her drive away to go find herself in the desert while leaving me to contemplate everything wrong with who I apparently was. The first thing I noticed after Melissa left was the silence, not just the absence of her voice, but the absence of that constant low-level tension that had become the soundtrack of my existence. I woke up Tuesday morning and actually stayed in bed for an extra 10 minutes, something I hadn't done in years because Melissa always had a morning schedule that required my immediate participation in her wellness routine. I made coffee and deliberately left the mug on the counter while I showered, just because I could. When I came back, there was no one there to document my domestic terrorism with photographic evidence for later discussion. I ate leftover pizza for breakfast, cold, straight from the box, standing in my boxers in the kitchen, and felt something I hadn't experienced in so long I'd forgotten what to call it, Peace. For lunch, I stopped at the deli near my current job site and got a pastrami sandwich the size of my forearm, the kind of meal that would have triggered a 40-minute lecture about processed meats and our family history of heart disease. I ate it while sitting on the tailgate of my truck, watching the crew frame walls, and realized I was actually enjoying the taste of food instead of mentally preparing for nutritional judgment. When I got home that evening, I left my work boots right by the back door where they belonged, where I could grab them easily the next morning, and walked around my own house without tiptoeing. I turned on the TV to a baseball game instead of whatever mindfulness documentary Melissa had queued up, cracked open a beer, and put my feet up on the coffee table she'd spent 3 months selecting for optimal feng shui. My phone buzzed around 8 o'clock with a text from Sedona. The Wi-Fi here is absolutely terrible. I specifically told you to research connectivity when you looked up this place. How am I supposed to maintain my social media presence with spotty internet? This is exactly the kind of oversight that shows you don't really listen when I talk about my business needs. I stared at the message for a full minute before the absurdity hit me. I had never researched her retreat center. She'd booked it herself after consulting with her spiritual advisor and reading reviews on wellness blogs I'd never heard of. But somehow, the inadequate internet was my fault because I existed in the same household where the decision was made. I typed back, "Sorry to hear about the Wi-Fi issues. Hope the retreat helps anyway." No apology for something I didn't do, no promise to somehow fix Arizona's internet infrastructure from my living room in Ohio. Wednesday night she called, and I could hear the frustration in her voice when I answered cheerfully instead of with the subdued tone of a man properly contemplating his failures. "You sound different," she said suspiciously. "Have you been thinking about what we discussed before I left?" "I've definitely been thinking," I replied, which was true. I'd been thinking about how quiet my house was, how I'd completed 3 home maintenance projects without anyone explaining better ways to do them, and how I'd watched an entire football game without anyone commenting on the violent energy I was absorbing. Good. I hope you're really examining your patterns and resistance to growth. The energy here is incredible. I can already feel my spirit opening up without all the negativity I've been carrying. The negativity she'd been carrying. As if my presence in her life was some kind of spiritual contamination that required professional cleansing in the desert. I found myself wondering when exactly I'd become the source of all her problems instead of the guy who worked 60-hour weeks to help pay for her chakra readings and organic superfood smoothies. By Thursday, I was doing something I hadn't done in years. I was remembering who I used to be. I found myself going through old photo albums while eating dinner on the couch, something that would have horrified Melissa, who insisted meals be eaten at the dining table with proper place settings and meaningful conversation about our personal growth. In a box I'd forgotten existed, I discovered pictures from before our marriage, me on my Harley at Sturgis with my buddy Rick, both of us grinning like idiots after a 3-day ride through the Black Hills. I remembered that trip, the freedom of the open road, the simple pleasure of good friends and loud engines, the version of myself that made decisions based on what sounded fun instead of what would minimize domestic conflict. Melissa had convinced me to sell that bike 6 months after our wedding. "It's dangerous, Warren, and honestly, it's kind of immature for a married man to be playing weekend warrior on a motorcycle. My friends are starting to ask questions about your priorities." I'd believed her then, thought she was helping me become a more responsible version of myself. Looking at those photos now, I saw a man who was genuinely happy, not someone who needed improvement. I kept digging through the box and found more evidence of the person I'd erased. Camping gear from weekend trips I used to take, concert tickets from shows I'd attended, business cards from the side carpentry projects I'd enjoyed before Melissa decided they were taking time away from our relationship. I remembered the night she'd scheduled my entire weekend with a couple's pottery class, a farmer's market visit, and a dinner party with her design colleagues, effectively eliminating any possibility of the woodworking project I'd planned. "I just think it's important that we grow together as a couple instead of you disappearing into the garage every weekend," she'd explained. "Isolation isn't healthy for relationships." But I hadn't been isolating. I'd been doing something I loved, something that made me feel accomplished and creative. She'd systematically replaced every activity that brought me joy with activities that brought her social media content and networking opportunities. I found a photo of myself at my buddy Dave's wedding, back when I still laughed easily and told stories that made people genuinely enjoy my company. Now I couldn't remember the last time I'd been invited anywhere without Melissa, or the last time I'd spoken up in a group conversation without mentally calculating whether my opinion would embarrass her later. She trained me to be quiet, agreeable, and invisible unless she needed me to validate something she was saying. The most painful discovery was a picture of my old workshop space before Melissa's great garage reorganization project. My tools had been arranged logically, my workbench covered with half-finished projects that excited me, everything positioned for actual use rather than aesthetic approval. I'd been building custom cabinets for extra income back then, taking pride in creating something beautiful and functional with my hands. Melissa had convinced me to stop taking those projects, claiming they brought the wrong kind of clients to our home and that the sawdust was affecting her allergies. Looking at that workspace now, I realized she hadn't been protecting her health. She'd been eliminating anything that made me feel competent and independent. I sat there until almost midnight, surrounded by photographic evidence of a confident, happy man who'd somehow allowed himself to be convinced he needed fixing. The guy in those pictures wouldn't have apologized for coffee rings or asked permission to watch sports in his own living room. He definitely wouldn't have spent 4 years walking on eggshells in his own home, afraid that any authentic expression of personality might trigger hours of criticism disguised as helpful feedback. Melissa returned Sunday evening with her arms full of sage bundles and expectations. I heard her car in the driveway and felt something I'd never experienced before her trips. Complete calm instead of the usual anxiety about what mood she'd be in and what I'd inevitably done wrong in her absence. She walked through the front door like a wellness warrior returning from battle, immediately scanning the living room for evidence of my spiritual growth or domestic failures. "The energy in here feels different," she announced, setting down her bags filled with crystals and organic skincare products that probably cost more than my weekly paycheck. "Did you do the meditation exercises I suggested? Please tell me you at least attempted some self-reflection." I was sitting in my recliner, the one she'd been trying to replace with something more aesthetically pleasing for 2 years, watching the evening news and drinking a beer. Normal Sunday activities for a normal person, but I could see her cataloging each element as evidence of my resistance to enlightenment. "I did a lot of thinking," I said calmly. "Good, because honestly, Warren, this house was chaos when I left. Look at this. You've got a water glass on the coffee table without a coaster, there are newspapers scattered around, and I can already tell you haven't been maintaining the feng shui arrangements I worked so hard to create." She walked through our living room like a drill sergeant conducting inspection, picking up the few items I'd left in comfortable positions and returning them to their designated spiritual locations. "And the kitchen. Warren, there are crumbs on the counter and the dish towels are folded wrong. How am I supposed to create beautiful spaces for my clients when I come home to this kind of negative energy?" I watched her perform this familiar routine, cataloging my failures, building her case for why my existence was problematic, and felt something shift inside me. The week of peace had shown me what life could feel like without constant criticism, and I wasn't willing to give that up anymore. "Melissa," I said quietly, "I want a divorce." She froze mid-adjustment of a decorative candle that I'd apparently moved 3 inches from its optimal position. For about 10 seconds, the house was completely silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Then she exploded like a wellness grenade filled with essential oils and righteous indignation. "What did you just say to me?" Her voice went up about 2 octaves, and she dropped the bundle of sage she'd been holding. "Are you having some kind of midlife crisis? Is this because I've been trying to help you become a better version of yourself?" I remained sitting in my chair, hands folded, voice steady. "I've been thinking about our marriage, and I realize I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a long time." "Not happy? Not happy?" She started pacing around the coffee table like a caged animal, her spiritual calm completely evaporated. "I've spent 4 years of my life trying to elevate you, trying to help you reach your potential, and you're telling me you're not happy?" She grabbed one of her new crystals from the bag and held it up like evidence. "I just spent a week in the desert working on myself, clearing my chakras, learning new healing techniques that could benefit our relationship, and you ambush me with divorce talk the minute I walk through the door?" It's not an ambush, Melissa. It's a decision I've been coming to for a while now. That's when she really lost it. She hurled the crystal across the room where it shattered against the wall, leaving a small dent in the drywall I'd probably have to repair. You are not leaving this marriage. Do you have any idea what we've built together? What I've invested in making you a better man. She was screaming now, and I realized the neighbors could probably hear every word. You were a mess when I met you. No sense of style, no understanding of spiritual wellness, no appreciation for beautiful things. I made you into someone worth being married to. I stood up slowly, and she seemed to realize that her usual intimidation tactics weren't working the way they used to. You can't just destroy everything because you're going through some temporary phase of selfishness. I won't let you ruin what we've built here. Over the next 3 days, Melissa cycled through every manipulation technique in her arsenal like a broken spiritual jukebox playing the greatest hits of emotional blackmail. Monday morning started with tears, real ones this time, not the strategic crying she usually deployed during arguments about my inadequacies. Warren, please, I know I can be demanding sometimes, but it's only because I see so much potential in you. Don't throw away 4 years over some temporary feelings. When tears didn't work, she shifted to seduction, appearing in the kitchen Tuesday morning wearing the silk nightgown she'd bought for our honeymoon and hadn't worn since. Remember how good we used to be together? How passionate things were before life got so complicated. She pressed against me while I was making coffee, trying to rekindle something that had been systematically extinguished by years of criticism about my technique, timing, and emotional presence during intimate moments. By Wednesday, she'd called in reinforcements. Her sister Brianna showed up at dinner time with a casserole and a lecture about marriage commitment that she delivered while sitting at our dining table like she was conducting an intervention. Warren, I don't know what's gotten into you, but Melissa is devastated. Do you realize how lucky you are to have a woman who cares enough about your growth to invest this much energy in helping you improve? I looked at Brianna, recently divorced after her husband got tired of her constant attempts to redesign his personality, and felt the irony wash over me like a cold shower. Brianna, didn't your marriage end last year because David said he felt like he was living with a life coach instead of a wife? Her face flushed red, but she pressed on. That's completely different. David was resistant to any kind of positive change. He wanted to stay stuck in his patterns forever. And how's that working out for you? I asked calmly. Being alone but spiritually superior? Melissa jumped in before Brianna could respond. See? This is exactly what I'm talking about. This new sarcastic, mean-spirited attitude you've developed. This isn't the man I married. You're right, I said. The man you married was afraid to speak up. I'm not anymore. Thursday brought the therapy ultimatum. I've made us an appointment with a couples counselor, Melissa announced, waving a business card like it was a court summons. Dr. Patricia Hawkins specializes in helping couples navigate growth phases and communication breakdowns. If you have any respect for our marriage, you'll attend this session. I'll go to one session, I agreed, but I'm not changing my mind about the divorce. Friday was the bribery phase. I've been thinking about your motorcycle, she said over breakfast, her voice artificially casual like she was discussing the weather. Maybe I was too hasty in asking you to sell it. If it's really important to you, we could look at getting you another one. Something safer, more age-appropriate. Age-appropriate. Even her peace offerings came with conditions and subtle insults. And I know you miss your woodworking. We could clear out part of the garage, set up a proper workshop area. I've been researching soundproofing materials so the noise wouldn't affect my home office. These were the exact same activities she'd convinced me to abandon because they were dangerous, immature, and disruptive to our domestic harmony. Now that her control was slipping, suddenly my interests were negotiable rather than problematic. What about the dust affecting your allergies? I asked. I'll get an air purifier. Warren, I'm willing to compromise here. I just need you to meet me halfway. Saturday brought the nuclear option. Fine, she said, her voice cold and calculated. If you insist on destroying our marriage, just know that I'll be entitled to half of everything, including your construction business. She'd done her research, Probably spent the week consulting with divorce attorneys while pretending to be heartbroken. Half of the business you built before you even met me. Half of the house you bought with your own money. Half of your retirement savings. Is your little midlife crisis really worth losing everything you've worked for? I looked at her sitting across our dining table, no longer the spiritual wellness guru or the devastated wife, just a woman calculating her potential payout from 4 years of emotional investment. Actually, Melissa, I consulted with a lawyer last month. The business is protected under premarital assets, and I have documentation of my separate property contributions to the house. You'll get what you're legally entitled to, but it's not going to be the windfall you're imagining. The look on her face was worth every dollar I'd paid for that legal consultation. 2 weeks later, Melissa played her final card in what I can only describe as the most pathetic and desperate performance of her entire manipulation career. I was at work when I got the call from emergency services. My wife had been taken to St. Mary's Hospital with chest pains and was asking for me. My first instinct was genuine concern, the kind of automatic response that 4 years of marriage programs into you even when the relationship is over. I dropped everything, told my crew to wrap up the framing work, and drove straight to the hospital expecting to find her hooked up to monitors with some serious cardiac event. Instead, I found Melissa in the emergency room, dramatically clutching her chest while explaining to a very patient nurse about the crushing pain and overwhelming anxiety she'd been experiencing since her husband started having his midlife crisis. She spotted me walking into her curtained area and immediately began the performance I now realized she'd been rehearsing. "Warren. Oh, thank God you're here. I thought I was having a heart attack. The pain was so intense, and I could barely breathe, and all I could think about was how I might die without us fixing things between us." She reached for my hand with the desperation of someone trying to grab the last life preserver on a sinking ship. The attending physician, Dr. Rodriguez, looked at me with the weary expression of someone who'd seen this exact scenario before. "Your wife is experiencing what appears to be an anxiety attack," he explained diplomatically. "Her EKG is normal, blood pressure is slightly elevated but not dangerous, and all her cardiac markers are within normal limits. We're going to keep her for observation for a few hours, but there's no indication of any heart problems." Melissa squeezed my hand tighter. "But the pain was so real, Warren. I've never felt anything like it. It started right after I realized you might actually leave me, and I just couldn't handle the thought of losing you forever. I should have felt sympathy. A decent person would have felt some guilt about causing their spouse enough stress to land them in the emergency room. Instead, I felt something I'd never experienced in our entire relationship, absolute clarity about who she really was. "Melissa," I said gently, "I'm glad you're okay, but this doesn't change anything about the divorce." That's when her mask completely shattered. "Are you kidding me?" she screamed, loud enough that I could see other patients and staff members turning to look. "I'm lying here in a hospital bed because of the stress you've caused, and you're still talking about divorce?" The nurse stepped closer, probably preparing to call security if things escalated further. "Ma'am, you need to keep your voice down. This is a medical facility." But Melissa was beyond caring about appropriate behavior or public dignity. "This man is destroying his family because he's too selfish to work on his problems. He's having some pathetic midlife crisis and I'm the one paying the price with my health." She was gesturing wildly now, nearly pulling out her foreline. 4 years I've invested in making him a better person, and this is how he repays me? I realized this was actually the perfect moment. Melissa revealing her true character in front of medical professionals who could serve as witnesses to her instability. I stepped out of the curtained area and made a quick phone call to the process server I'd hired, who'd been waiting for the right opportunity to deliver the divorce papers when she couldn't avoid them or create a scene at our house. 20 minutes later, while Melissa was still ranting to Dr. Rodriguez about my emotional abandonment and spiritual immaturity, a professional-looking woman in a business suit appeared at the foot of her hospital bed. "Melissa Thompson? I have legal documents for you." Melissa's face went from red rage to white shock as she realized what was happening. "You're having me served with divorce papers while I'm in the hospital? What kind of monster are you?" "The kind who's tired of being manipulated," I said calmly. Even your medical emergency is about controlling me instead of actual health concerns. The process server handed over the paperwork with professional efficiency. You've been legally served. Have a good day. As she left, Melissa completely lost what remained of her composure, screaming obscenities that made the nurse call security and probably traumatized several elderly patients in nearby beds. You heartless bastard. You planned this. You're a sociopath. I hope you die alone and miserable. The security guard approached her bed. Ma'am, we're going to need you to calm down immediately, or we'll have to ask you to leave. It was beautiful, really, Melissa's final performance, proving to everyone present exactly why I was divorcing her. 6 months later, I'm sitting on the balcony of my downtown loft, drinking coffee without worrying about coasters, watching the sunrise over the city while my new Harley-Davidson sits in the parking garage below like a chrome and steel symbol of reclaimed freedom. The divorce was finalized last month. Melissa got exactly what she was legally entitled to, which turned out to be far less than the fortune she'd imagined, and I got my life back. The loft is everything she would have hated: exposed brick walls, industrial fixtures, a functional kitchen instead of a spiritual sanctuary, and absolutely zero feng shui considerations. I love every square foot of it. My buddy Rick came by last weekend to help me set up the workshop area I'm building in the spare room. Man, you look like yourself again, he said while we assembled my new workbench. I was starting to worry we'd lost you permanently to the wellness cult. Rick had never liked Melissa, something he'd diplomatically kept to himself during our marriage but was now free to express. She had you convinced you needed fixing when the only thing broken was her ability to appreciate what she had. I've reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during the Melissa years, guys who'd stopped inviting me places because she'd always find reasons why their activities were inappropriate or their influence was negative for my personal growth. Turns out they'd just been waiting for me to remember I was allowed to have fun without permission. My construction business is thriving without the constant stress of going home to criticism and demands. I've taken on 3 major projects this quarter, including a custom home build that's stretching my skills in ways that excite rather than exhaust me. Amazing how much mental energy you have for professional challenges when you're not spending every evening defending your right to exist as yourself. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Melissa moved in with Derek, her yoga instructor, about 3 weeks after our divorce was finalized. Apparently, she's now focused on healing his commitment issues and helping him reach his spiritual potential. Derek, from what I understand, is a 26-year-old who lives in a converted van and considers himself a free spirit. I give it 6 months before she's trying to convince him he needs a real apartment and a retirement plan. Last month, I met Jade Miller at a classic rock concert, something I never could have attended during my marriage because Melissa considered loud music toxic for the nervous system. Jade is a contractor who specializes in historic restorations, rides her own motorcycle, and thinks my dry humor is hilarious instead of spiritually destructive. When I told her about my divorce story, she laughed and said, "Sounds like you dodged a bullet wrapped in organic cotton and essential oils." We're taking things slow, but she's already shown me more genuine appreciation in 2 months than Melissa managed in 4 years. She actually listens when I talk about work, asks intelligent questions about construction techniques, and has never once suggested I need improvement or spiritual realignment. The best part? When I leave my coffee mug on her counter, she either doesn't notice or doesn't care. Either way, it's perfect. I'm planning a cross-country motorcycle trip this summer, something I dreamed about for years but never pursued because Melissa would have considered it selfish, dangerous, and spiritually regressive. Now it's just a fun adventure with no hidden meanings or personal growth requirements attached. Sometimes I wonder if Melissa ever realized that her constant improvements actually made everything worse, or if she's convinced herself that I was just too resistant to positive change. Honestly, I don't care anymore. I found someone who thinks I'm pretty great exactly as I am, and that's made all the difference.